Thanks, folks. Good morning. I'm Mike Krause, Vice President of Operations here at the Independence Institute. And just want to say that we are very, very grateful that as this debate and election season has rolled around, that we have this venue to do things like this. So first, if you haven't been here before, welcome to the Independence Institute, still new and permanent headquarters building here in Uptown Denver. We're very happy we can have you here. I actually went over to the District 6 police station, which is across the street, and asked them if we could get 16th Avenue shut down for the debate. And they humored me and said they would get on that. But it hasn't happened yet, but maybe by the time we're done, we'll be good to go. So listen, we're going to get going here. We're going to have a good time. The moderators today, Eli Stokols is the political reporter for Fox 31, the Fox affiliate here in Denver. I'm sure you've seen him covering the State House, covering elections, covering politics for the state of Colorado. And Wayne Laugesen, who is the editorial page editor at the Colorado Springs Gazette. The great thing is you do get to see reporters on TV. Very, very, very rarely do you actually get to see an editorial page editor outside of the confines of the Gazette's building. So I'm going to turn this over to them, and we're going to get going with our debate. And again, thanks very much for being here today.
Thanks for coming this morning, and thanks to the 8 smart people sitting up in front of you. We're excited to hear from all of you this morning. I think just to lay out some of the ground rules real quick, we only have an hour. We want to touch on, I think, 5 general topic areas, and so I think we've agreed that we'll start and we'll just, Wayne and I alternate asking questions. We might start with one side. If we start with folks on the right, or you guys on the sort of, yeah, I don't know. Who's on, it depends what side you're on. I'm trying to get too confused, but
that's the hardest question.
I know. So we'll start with, if we ask you guys a question, we'll give you about 2 minutes or so. You guys can kind of figure out quickly amongst yourselves who wants to speak on that, or if a couple of you want to speak. Try to take about 2 minutes for an initial answer. We'll give the other side about a minute or so to respond, maybe a little more. Not going to be too tight on time. We want to hear from you. We want to let you lay out your arguments, but we do want to cover a number of things and get everybody out of here in an hour. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
And if there's follow-up questions, maybe we'll push and press you guys on that, or ask some follow-up questions. But we want to hit 5 topic areas. And I guess the first topic area is just, I don't know, everybody says it's the biggest issue in the election, right? Jobs, the economy. And so, was there a coin toss? Are we starting with? Okay. So conservatives, you're up. The economy and job creation. I know there's a lot of little sort of nuanced arguments, and there's a overarching macro argument in terms of job growth and what's keeping the economy bogged down and what's going to get it going again. So I guess in 2 minutes, if you want to start by just summing up the conservative view, the Romney platform, and we'll go from there.
Start with Congressman. There you go.
Okay. Well, whether you were for or against what President Obama put in place, the grand plan, of course, was the stimulus, $830 plus or minus billion of government spending that was supposed to fix things. The reality is it hasn't. This has been the longest, deepest recession we've had since the Second World War. It's been the slowest recovery. We actually have fewer people employed in America today than when Barack Obama took office, and yet we've had 8.8 million more people join the workforce age-eligible population. Fewer people working, a much larger population, lowest percentage of our population actually in the labor force. That's the number of people that say, I've got a job, or at least I'd like to get one. The lowest since 1981. We've got almost 500,000 more people unemployed today than when the president took office. We've got 811,000 on long-term unemployment. 1.1 million more people that tell the Labor Department, I'd like to get a job, I can't find a job. It's not working. That's the bottom line. It hasn't worked. And yet the president tells us, oh yeah, I think we're just one big tax increase away from getting this thing right. I mean, it just defies logic that by increasing taxes, we're somehow going to right this ship that is listing badly. Mitt Romney, on the other hand, says, how about we do what we've done before, many different times. Kennedy did it, Reagan did it, we did it in 01 and 03. Lower taxes across the board on everybody. Lower taxes on business. Create some certainty, some confidence in the environment, the economic environment, and get the knot out of people's bellies so that they will invest, they will take risks, they will hire again, and get this economy growing. Reduce government spending down below 20%, which is where we've been historically, and grow the economy, get spending under control, and grow our way out of this. We think there's a better plan.
So I asked the left side of the panel here.
To rebut? Yeah.
Sorry, okay,
Yeah.
very good. Yeah, go ahead and just
Take a
that.
minute, so.
So when we look at what's happening in the economy, one thing we can't agree on is that we're all in a the economy is in a difficult spot. But I think where we're going to see, what we're avoiding in the discussion is the role that the public sector actually plays in making sure that jobs are in fact created. Now, nobody's going to suggest that the government is the place where all jobs come from, as we are often accused of doing. But in reality, there's a point at which the public sector must invest in things like transportation, education, research and development, things that actually level the playing field so that our businesses have an opportunity to, in fact, create the kinds of jobs, pay the kinds of wages, so that we have both cash and confidence in the economy. And as long as we have a gridlock in Congress like we do now, where there was one group of people who refuse to have a conversation about compromise and where we need to go forward, we aren't going to be in a position to have an economy that's vital in creating jobs.
Very good. While we are on the economy, I have a question. I was going to wait till later, but it came from the audience, and it fits right into this topic. So it's got kind of a long background. I'll read it quickly. To increase aggregate demand, Keynesian theory says the government can step in and spend money when individuals cannot. Theoretically, the government can reverse an economic slide by contributing to spending. Governments have increased taxes, print money, or borrow to spend money they don't have. This might lead to inflation or worse, hyperinflation. The government effort is justified by the Keynesian multiplier is greater than 1. In 2009, a rigorous study was done by John B. Taylor and John F. Kogan at Stanford University, and it showed that by 2011, every stimulus dollar spent would result in almost 60% fall in private sector output. Okay, I'm going to jump to the question. Is there any justification for a candidate continuing quantitative easing under the current economic circumstances for what appears to be unsuccessful results?
You guys want to answer first? Who was?
You guys start.
Yeah.
Or anybody who has a thought can start.
I'll take it. Yeah, sure.
I never turned down a shot at 2 minutes. Well, I would ask you, Wayne, to read the question again, but that would
I only read part of it.
most of the 2 minutes. I mean, I think it is related to the previous question, which is what's going on with the economy, what are we going to do about jobs, and have the efforts that have been made by the government in the stimulus package and other things actually made a difference, and should we continue those or should we do something different? Bottom line is that and there were several references, I think, to Keynesian economics there. It certainly is a basic principle of Keynesian economics that the government has an important role to play in the economy, in stimulating the economy, and helping the free market to develop and to provide the kind of robust economy that we need to have to make sure that everybody's employed. I do think there continues to be a role for a progressive, thoughtful, activist federal government that's involved in the economy, that's providing stimulus, that's providing economic activity that will help to provide jobs.
In order for the government to create jobs, to move the economy forward, a dollar spent by the government must be better spent than the private sector. That's the essence of the multiplier. Academic research indicates that we can't find multipliers much above 0.2, 0.3, which means that for a dollar spent, you have 30 cents of impact on the economy. That means that there's a deadweight loss in the private sector. That means the private sector doesn't have the resources necessary to create the jobs, to expand their plant and equipment. What we have in this economy right now is a problem with fixed costs. We have risk to investment. We have risk to building new jobs and expanding plant, coming from healthcare, coming from excessive government spending, coming from great debt, which is burdening our financial system. I was talking to Ellen McGrattan at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minnesota, probably the leading expert on multipliers, and she says she's shocked by the return of the multiplier in political discussion. In her research, she's never been able to find one much above 0.2.
I think we still have a little bit of time, right? We still have a minute. Yes. Okay, so I'd like to just chime in here with some of the statistics that Kerry Kennedy had when we were talking about the stimulus, because we act as if the stimulus actually went into our economy, and it did not. There are huge amounts of monies that just sort of sat around. I mean, I was in the Chicago train station recently, saw this great thing about 2010 stimulus, we're going to build the fast tracks and we're going to do this fast speed rail. It didn't go into the economy, so the idea that it failed has to presuppose that it actually went in and did things and then failed. What it did was get stopped, get rejected. The money that was supposed to go into the economy through the stimulus didn't even get there. There are many, many examples of Republican governors who refused to have that. Chris Christie is a perfect example of that. Refused to get the money that they wanted for the river building there. But one of the most important government things that's a multiplier is food stamps, because that gives a huge multiplier into the economy.
Maybe we can continue. I want to talk a little bit about tax policy while we're on the economy, because it's a big thing in the campaign, and both sides sort of arguing over what the other candidate's going to do with taxes. And obviously, the ideology, the theory here is not new. You have a sort of cut taxes philosophy on the Republican side, the conservative side. The Democratic side, I mean, we have a president who's talking about letting the Bush tax cuts expire for people earning over $250,000. That includes most people who own small businesses, as conservatives point out. Can we just kind of spend a few minutes talking about the merits of the view on taxes and why, in your view, we can start over there on the right, why it is important to cut taxes in order to stimulate growth?
Oh, well, let me start, and I'll yield the mic to my colleagues. Let's start with what we agree on. Both sides want to cut the corporate income tax. The president has made a very aggressive case for that. Governor Romney has made a case for that. There's a very good case for that. It's the highest corporate tax rate in the world. When we reduce that tax rate to 28% or 25%, that's the Obama and the Romney levels respectively, we get significant job growth because we are reducing the fixed cost. The point is, our problem here is not lack of government spending. It's not lack of getting the money out. It's that we have huge fixed costs out there in the marketplace. That means risk that people can't get around, that the regulations that are raising their cost of doing business, and small business creation is not occurring. So reducing the corporate tax rate is a very good thing, and I hope that when whoever's elected, Congress comes back and does that first.
Yeah, one thing I would raise is pulling back at more of a philosophical level is this the reason why conservatives want to see rates come down and the tax base be broadened is that we have faith that left to their own devices collectively, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans and small business owners and so on will make better decisions with those dollars and take better risks than will government agents. What the progressive system is puts great faith in the wisdom of government bureaucrats to make these decisions. So we would rather not have the government pick winners and losers. We leave that to the marketplace. That includes getting rid of tax loopholes and special interest provisions in the tax code, as well as the kind of programs we see with, like in the energy sector, that says we're going to pick this category of energy to reward and another category of energy to penalize because we know what's best. And that's at the root of this difference. It depends who you believe you want to put your faith in more, a government agent or collectively a lot of small business owners who have that take that risk.
Yeah, well, that's not really talking about taxes and what our argument is. That's talking about something else altogether, I think. But when you're talking about taxes, this didn't come from me, but I will take credit for it. That the Republicans want to lower taxes in good times, they want to lower taxes in bad times. It's a religion. People sign pledges for it as if they're signing up for a cult. The cutting taxes can't always be the answer. And if cutting taxes provokes job growth, which is the point, I believe, and you look at the last decade in which we've had the Bush tax cuts for the entire decade, the Bush tax cuts remain in place right now. We've had one of the worst job creation decades in American history. So if tax cuts always create jobs, what happens?
Yeah, I want to bring this to a little bit more to a kitchen table level, in that, listen, when I'm single working mom, when government takes more of my money, what it's telling me is that government's priorities are above my kids. So for me to put food on the table, for me to buy my kids a pair of shoes, comes after I have paid government. I think a lot of times women in general view working and taxes differently. Here's what it is to us. I work and I get paid not because it inflates my ego, but because I have to put food on the table. And so when you take more of that money from me, you're taking my time. And as a mom, my time is important. You're taking time away from my kids when government takes more of my money.
Well, that's an interesting way to look at taxation. As a local government official, a district attorney, let me tell you that one of the realities that we have to include in the discussion is that government has a role, local government in particular, and we are constantly dealing with the realities of insufficient tax rates to provide basic services throughout the state of Colorado. You can look at taxation as somehow the government saying that it's more important than your family, but the reality is that Americans have always seen this role. The reality is there's basic services that have to be provided by government. They cost money. You have to raise the money through taxation, and it has to be a reasonable rate.
My last comment there is that schools, in my opinion, as a candidate, when I went around talking with women, that was the most important thing that they cared about. And when I asked them, would you raise taxes to keep good schools, they always said yes. So although it is absolutely true that women are very, very concerned about taxes, schools are provided by your tax money, yours and mine, and they are the most important thing that most people look at for providing for their family.
Okay, let's get one thing clear. As a mom, I never said no government, but when you ask me for more, that's the way I view it. Now, more money for good schools, there's a key word in there. What is good? And again, I come back to this. We accept a reasonable level of taxation, but what is reasonable for me as a working mom and taking more money out of my pocket versus government, those are two different levels. And you've got to look at it not just in the macro sense, but in the micro sense. How does it affect the kitchen table? And if the multiplier is at best 2/3, that isn't a very good investment for a working family to ask for more of their money.
Okay, we're going to move on. Speaking of government services and taxation, let's move on to Obamacare. Obamacare requires that all employees cover abortion, drugs, and contraceptives, regardless of religious or moral objections to that. What is your view of the ability of people to live their faith commitments outside of the four walls of the church in the public square?
Is it our turn?
Yes, I think that this is great.
Well, I think the issue of separation of church and state sort of misses the point of providing access to health care for all Americans. I mean, Obamacare goes beyond, so far beyond the issues that you've raised. It's already saved literally millions of people millions of dollars. We've got checks coming back to individuals who have overpaid insurance rates. We have women who are getting free health care, preventive care. We have now, in my family, we have children that are under the age of 23. They can stay on my health insurance. They can stay on people's health insurance for the first time. We have people who cannot be denied access to health care because of pre-existing conditions. The notion that Obamacare should be reduced to the idea, to these questions of religious belief, I think completely misses the point of this discussion. And this discussion is about reducing fixed costs. It's about trying to make sure that we all have access to health care and an economy that works for people. And what we know from Obamacare up to this point, and what we're pretty darn sure is going to happen in the future, is that we're going to have access, we're going to have more people covered by health insurance. And we all know that that's the point of insurance. The more people you have who have access to care, the less actual drain it is. I want to add one other thing. My husband is in the potato business, and he after we did some of our free trade negotiations, there was real competition between potato producers up in the northern part of the country with Canadian potato producers. And guess who can produce potatoes cheaper? The Canadian producers. And why? Because when American potato producers want to provide health insurance for their employees, they have to shoulder the whole cost of that health care. But in Canada, they spread the cost of that care across the entire country. And it makes that product less expensive, which means they sell more of them, which means we have more jobs and the economy is in better shape. That's what the conversation about Obamacare ought to be about: access to health care and our ability to level the playing field for all of our employers.
Save the potato.
Go ahead, Bob.
Well, once again, we heard that in the progressive mindset, the progressive argument, the end always justifies the means, even if that requires trampling on our constitutional rights and freedoms. Folks, the reason that the First Amendment was first is because protecting religious liberty in this country was absolutely sacred. And we were just told that that doesn't matter anymore, that if we say it's about health care, everything else be damned. I disagree. And I disagree very, very strongly. Talk about it missing the point. The point of Obamacare was trampling on our freedoms. The point of Obamacare was implementing 20 new taxes, fees, or penalties. The point of Obamacare was an independent panel that's going to tell doctors and patients what kind of health care they get. The point of Obamacare was a huge encroachment on individual liberty and freedom. And I think that's the point of the discussion. Do we need to improve healthcare delivery and access in this country? Absolutely. But this was a very, very bad way to get it done, and that's why it ought to be repealed and replaced.
May I do a follow-up question at this point? Okay. Angie, you talked about equal access to health care. If we create equal access to health care for 350 million Americans, and we have the same amount of health care that we have now, how do you think that's going to play out? How are we going to spread our current, and health care isn't something where you can just turn up the volume or turn it down. It's pretty much a fixed supply right now, and it would take a long time to change that. How do you distribute health care without rationing and without what someone might call a death panel, if it is a government panel that decides what level of care someone gets?
Well, my question is why, if we create a demand for healthcare, wouldn't we then get a supply of people working in that and smart people doing it? So the idea that somehow, because we're going to have lots of people who need it, we're just going to not be able to meet that demand seems kind of silly to me. I know many, many college students who are quite excited about going into the healthcare field. We're making tremendous strides in providing healthcare to people. There are lots and lots of opportunities for people to get their degrees that address these types of needs very quickly. And there's lots and lots of opportunities for companies to respond and come up with innovative ideas and creative ideas. And Mike seems to need to say something too.
Yeah, We do have health care for all, as Mitt Romney said. If you're really sick, you go to the emergency room. So, nobody, despite what we heard at one debate, nobody actually lies on the street and people just pass them by and don't take them to the hospital. But if the question is how to provide the most health care to the most people for the least amount of money, Mr. Beaupre thinks it's about the government taking something over, and that's the reason that we have this. And I don't know who said that was the reason, but he somehow has inferred that this must be what people like us are thinking. I'm somehow part of the takeover of the medical industry. But the point is that we have to make medicine work for everybody. We have to include everyone and lower costs.
There's a broad consensus, fortunately, that we need to fix our healthcare system. And before the debate that led to the passage of the Affordable Care Act, that consensus was driving Washington towards reform. The critique that we have of the Affordable Care Act is that it relies far too much on the bureaucracies, on government to direct our healthcare system. That is a major problem because, as was pointed out, we should be getting more supply as demand increases and prices fall, but that should be familiar to anybody in the room as a market phenomenon. So what we've suggested at Heritage is that we empower everybody to buy their own insurance. If you don't file a tax return, you'll get a voucher. If you do, you'll get a voucher for health insurance. So we'll end automatically, and 100% everyone will have health insurance. And then we will have a more competitive force in place. Let me point out that the system that's being defended on this side was just analyzed a few weeks ago by the Congressional Budget Office, and the costs of that system have gone up significantly. So now we're looking at $1 trillion in outlays for the exchanges, the so-called health exchanges, over the next 10 years, as opposed to significantly less than that estimate when the debate was going forward. So costs are going up over here. Let's try competition. Let's try bringing something of the marketplace into healthcare, which has helped in every other industry.
Bob, did you have something?
Very quickly. Bill just brought up the issue of price, and we were told 4 years ago right here in this town that Obamacare was going to reduce the cost of your premiums $2,500 a year. Kaiser Foundation, the Kaiser Family Foundation, just came out with their latest survey and say costs have actually gone up $3,065, $5,565 move against families, wrong direction, right out of our pocket. So this myth that somehow the Affordable Care Act was going to lower costs is just that. It's a myth. We already know it's not working.
Bob, what were you recommending when you were in Congress in order to bring down costs?
Yeah.
And what were you recommending?
Yeah, much more competition.
I don't remember. What particularly? I don't remember. I don't remember what you were recommending.
I thought we were having a Romney-Obama
This is a
debate.
policy debate, not
Well, you brought up what you were saying, so.
Yeah, I think what Bill just referred to is the way to do it, is more competition, the same way if you want to bring down the cost of breakfast cereal. You have more choices on the shelf, not fewer choices, and you empower the individual to make those decisions, not some government agency. Give me a government program that is actually run efficiently and lowered costs. I don't think there is one.
Bob, I want to hold on to the microphone for a second. I want to ask you, Bob, since you are closest probably to the Romney campaign, I want to ask you specifically about some of the comments that he's made about this, because obviously he worked on a law in Massachusetts, and he has said recently that there are pieces of Obamacare that he would like to keep, namely the pre-existing condition, continuing to cover folks with pre-existing conditions, and letting families keep their older kids up to a certain age, 26 under Obamacare, on their parents' plans. I think the question is, without a mandate, I know people don't like mandates, but without a mandate, without expanding the pool and making sure that companies have enough people that they're selling, how do you make that, cost competitive for healthcare companies to be forced to cover those people if you don't have that mandate?
You reduce the number of mandates within plans. Right now we've got state after state and the federal government trying to impose more mandates for coverage, which drives up the cost. You create more opportunity and competition, and the reason Now, I know I'm expanding the debate, but the reason that Paul Ryan is proposing the reforms in Medicare that he is because it's patterned after the very successful, very popular Federal Employees Health Benefit Plan, which empowers individuals to go pick the plan out in the private sector that best fits their needs, their family needs, their health care needs. What we have found with that over and over again is that when you empower the individual and they've got a little skin in the game, the choice, the empowerment, and the cost control empowerment, that drives cost down in the marketplace. You got tremendously greater competition and much more transparency in the pricing of healthcare. That's been proven over and over again. Mike wants to add to that if you mind.
In a few seconds. With the pre-existing condition issue, there are ways to get at that would not raise the free rider issues. For example, if someone's continuously covered for a period of time and they switch jobs and move to another place, you can require that they get guaranteed issue of a plan to avoid that. And that kind of covers it because they've been paying into the universal sort of pool of insurance premiums. They've been so-called good citizens. And the insurance industry, through secondary markets, can socialize those costs and those risks. The real problem ultimately is when you have somebody who's been a free rider. And then that tends to be the economic dynamic that creates this issue in the first place. And you can deal with some of that through secondary insurance markets that I'm sure Bill could explain in more detail. But the point is, there are ways of getting at these social issues, these problems through market mechanisms that are much more efficient than what we've seen in the sort of the blunderbuss meat cleaver approach that we have right now.
Yeah, I want to just say one thing about healthcare is that me personally, I want to talk about people. 2 years ago, I met a little boy who was 4 years old who was diagnosed with leukemia at a Relay for Life. He just was the keynote speaker at the Children's Hospital Foundation thing, and he got up there and talked about how he's been doing chemotherapy for 3 years, that the cancer was in his testicles and he was 6. He is still alive, and I want to tell you I would pay anything to keep that little boy alive. I don't care how much it costs me or my family or my extended family, because that little boy deserves to live. And yes, he's a free rider because I'm sure that his insurance plan has paid millions of dollars to keep him on this planet. But you know what? If you hadn't met that little boy, you would know it was worth it.
I think the other important thing that we're missing, I'm fascinated by the idea that somehow the federal insurance approach, federal employee insurance approach is held up as the example, because in essence that's what we're doing through the exchange programs. The whole point is that we provide a place, a broker, assistance to individuals to make good choices across privately provided insurance programs. That's sort of the very essence of the next stage of innovation, and I think that's a really important component of what we're trying to do. One of the things we know is that health insurance is going up. Healthcare is consuming a larger and larger part of our economy and our economic activity, and we need to do something about that. And the proposal that we have, the program that we're working on now, gives us the best shot at bringing everybody in and starting to deal with those overriding costs. And I think we just need to give that proposal some time to work and to actually move forward and make sure, because we all agree, the best way to do this is give everybody access to health insurance.
Yeah, we definitely do agree with that. Let me just make a comment about pre-existing conditions and then about regulations. Maybe Mike can make that. When I was going through cancer therapy, I paid enormous amounts of money out of pocket, and then my insurance company did for that therapy. Now, fortunately, it worked. I wasn't a 5-year-old guy, but I was in the same therapeutic radiation unit with lots of children who were going through, optical cancers and things that kids get. One of the reasons why we have high costs for treatment is we don't have a lot of competition in healthcare. We don't have a lot of competition in healthcare because we don't have customers in healthcare. We only have patients. The customers are the insurance companies. Now, how does that go back to pre-existing conditions? We could insure pre-existing conditions if they didn't cost as much. If cancer therapies didn't cost as much, we could insure them crazy. You could go in and have, I say, well, I've had cancer. Well, that's not a problem. It's not that costly if it comes back. It's because of the cost. And the way we bring down the cost is in other aspects of medicine. Bring in competition. Create customers who are patients so that they can pick and choose.
I'd like to answer that. I was just, some of the people here know, I was just laid off my job not long ago, and I have a pre-existing condition. I have type 1 diabetes. It's a very expensive disease. I'm now on a COBRA program, which government program, right? And I'm paying $900 a month for my health insurance, where I was paying $200 a month with a job. Now I'm paying $900 a month without a job. So if to get to there are tremendous advances being made in type 1 diabetes research. I have an insulin pump. I have a glucometer that reads my blood sugar level every 5 seconds. It helps keep my blood sugar in place so that I don't have the serious kinds of mind-numbingly expensive kinds of work that you have to do if your health gets worse. And I think the Heritage Foundation has serious ideas about how to fix some of these things. Just like I believe that the Obamacare was in a lot of ways, a bad compromise. But the point was that the other side, basically aside from the think tank world, basically refused to even look at what the people who put up Obamacare were trying to do in order to come up with real compromises that we can sit here and talk about.
Sorry to interrupt like that. It's just been for a while. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing. Amy, you want to make a quick point?
This won't take long at all. Health insurance does not equate to care. There's a huge difference. You can have health insurance, and it doesn't mean you're going to all of a sudden there'll be health care, but you may have to wait for it. All you have to do is look at Canada to know people who wait and wait and wait. They're covered, but they sometimes have to wait years for their care. So don't equate the two. That's my last word.
Canada's a democracy. You don't see them going back to the old system, do you?
They come here.
They come here.
They come here for
some do.
They come here.
Some would argue that they are going back to the old system to an extent. You didn't used to be able to jump queue and pay for better health care, and now you can. So.
But they're not going back to the old system. Old system is quite a bit different than what they have now.
They cross the border.
Let's go ahead, because we're going to run out of time just on healthcare alone if we don't move along. So I'd like to move along to immigration. I have heard the analogy that Mexico, views the United States as a giant ATM, and the United States views Mexico as a great temp employment service. I want to know from each panel what type of immigration reform you favor, if you do favor immigration reform, and how it might help our economy. Which side is up? Go ahead, Stan.
Okay. Well, immigration is an incredibly important issue, and we deal with it in law enforcement constantly, because every community in every part of the country has a large number of people who are here illegally, who are immigrants, whose citizenship status or residency status is unclear. They become a focus for criminal activity. One of the things I've started in my office is an initiative to protect immigrants from crime. My good friend, but political opposite, Ken Buck, in the neighboring judicial district, has the same program, because we see that crime grows in the immigrant community and the immigrant community becomes victims. What you need to do is a couple of things. First of all, I think the Obama administration has done a pretty good job of the first and most important thing, which is when an immigrant commits a serious crime, they should be deported. The Obama administration has been more aggressive about that than others, and has a number of protocols in place so that we can make sure that when somebody commits a serious crime, they're deported and sent back to the country that they came from if they were here illegally. But the next thing that you have to do is become realistic about, A, the extent of the issue. Every community has thousands of people who are here, many of whom have been here for 20, 30, even longer periods of time, who pay taxes, who work, who raise families, but because their immigration status is unclear, they're very vulnerable to crime, and they do not feel invested in our culture and in our society. We have to put in place meaningful reform that gives these people a path to legal residency, and eventually, I think, a path to citizenship to make our society work. No society can function that has an underclass that feels that they don't have a full stake in the society and that they could never resolve the fundamental issue. And I think the type of reform that President Reagan put in place, giving people a path to legal residency, is what needs to happen.
I'll make two big points. One, current immigration laws, for some unknown reason, limit the entry into this country of people who want to come here and invest a lot of money, create jobs, high levels of education, and so on. There's artificial limits on that, and those ought to go away. The other point, and one of the greatest proponents of that actually is Jared Paulus, who represents the Boulder area. He has legislation and has supported legislation to uncap some of those areas. The other point is that this recent wave of immigration going back the last maybe 15, 20 years is different than the prior ones in our history, mainly because we have created a welfare state. And the welfare state didn't used to be there. It's become a magnet in some cases, and even if it inadvertently plays a role, the reason why is that benefits now are available to the working poor. Now, we did a study of this. Legal immigrants without the benefit of a high school degree, on average, they paid about $9,000 a year in taxes, and on average, they took out about $31,000 a year of benefits. It's a very detailed study. So that's a problem to deal with. Until we reform our welfare system, it's hard to have an immigration system that makes sense. Milton Friedman said you can't simultaneously have a welfare state and open borders. It just don't work. And I think that's something we have to come to grips with, which has been lacking in these debates.
So if you're talking about legal immigrants, that doesn't address the idea that you have undocumented people. Legal immigrants are just like everybody else. They get whatever they need. Undocumented people in the state of Colorado are not entitled to any welfare benefits at all. And the one thing I would say is that there are many, I have actually represented a number of young people who were brought here as children who are just as American as my children. And the only difference between them and my daughter is that we drove here from New Jersey and their parents drove here from Tijuana. But they are just as American. They want to be here as Americans. And I had one boy who was a student at Metro State beg me to figure out a way to make him a citizen of America because he's never been in Mexico. And I told him there is no way for you to be able to become a citizen of the United States.
One quick point about the benefits. If you have a household and you have an anchor baby born in America who's a citizen and is eligible for something like food stamps, the allotment of food stamps would be calculated by how many are in the household, legal or illegal. So it's hard to calculate the total drain on the revenues, but it's enormous and it's growing and it's new. It's a new and different aspect of our immigration system than we had in previous generations.
Quick follow-up on the point Angie made. Do you support the DREAM Act? People who have been brought here as young children, perhaps, and as you said, Angie, they are as American as any child in the United States. Should they be able to enjoy in-state tuition and go to school and do everything an American can?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
You can't
Talk about the economic imperative. I mean, Governor Rick Perry's talked about that in Texas, and the fact that you had these people here, you educated them, invested in them up through high school. We've had the same debate in Colorado. Maybe address that from a more economic standpoint.
Well, first of all, by giving the people the opportunity to stay here legally and build a career here and build a life here, you have the opportunity to have them openly and fully contribute to the economy by paying taxes and being invested. I mean, the biggest concern I have about the current immigration status, and like I said, it's an issue in law enforcement, is we have a secret underclass throughout our society. And we have to become realistic about that. And the more we can do, and I think the DREAM Act does it, to give people an opportunity to be open, to be invested, and to be a part of the community. It will help us economically, and it will help everybody as we move forward as a diverse democracy.
The DREAM Act highlights, the real crisis that we've got ourselves into because of poor immigration policies. We want to make sure that everyone who is in this country is in here legally. And if you're not in here legally, to find a way to declare yourself and join the back of the line and become legal. Now, with the people who have been born in this country, whose parents were here and without proper documents, that's a really tough case. And there are various legislative approaches to this, one of which is by Marco Rubio. It's a very interesting way of approaching it, but it starts with the same principle. You've got to declare yourself. You've got to say, I am not here with the proper documents. And then there are steps and procedures thereafter to bring this person who was born in this country and was raised in this country and we've invested in this country into the fold.
Well, in most straightforward fashion, I think it's just a three-step process that we need to go through. One, we've got to secure our borders because we simply have to get control of who's coming in here. We all know people that we say, well, they're nice people and they deserve to stay and they're not creating any problems. But candidly, folks, there's a whole lot of people that are coming here that don't have the best of intentions when they come here. And it's them that are the big problem. We've got to secure our borders. Second, we've got to get away from a 17th or 18th century immigration system, modernize it so people can get an answer quickly that want to come here legally, that they can get a yes or a no. That's a big piece of it. We can control what the makeup of that immigrant population looks like. And third, nobody's mentioned it, but the 14th Amendment, the so-called anchor baby amendment, needs to be reformed. It was never intended to be working the way it is right now, and we've got to get our arms around that piece of the problem as well.
Securing the border, though, I think the statistics show at least that this president's put more troops, more border patrols on the border. How do you do that? It's not. Maybe more manpower. I'm just curious how.
It simply has to be a high enough priority, and administrations. You're absolutely right, Eli. And I didn't suggest that this administration hasn't increased efforts. We've got to provide the manpower, the technology, the financial resources. We have to be working with our neighbors to the south if that's where the biggest problem is. Excuse me, but it's not the only problem. I think if you understand a little bit about what's happening on the northern border, that's a huge problem as well as our seacoast. So it is an enormous problem. Until we get our hands around that piece of it, until you stop the leak in the bucket, you're going to continue to have the problem. That's got to be the first priority, is to control the borders. And it is a big challenge.
And expensive.
Very, very much so. Very much so.
So it looks to me like that might be a big government bureaucracy you're suggesting. But God forbid that we might have government actually do something important and useful in our society. But let's think about this. The United States trade policy, especially with relation to the corn subsidies, has destroyed a lot of the Mexican farming place, which is why those people are looking for jobs anyway. Our drug policies have destroyed whole towns and a lot of the government in Mexico because a lot of the drug stuff that's going on down there and the types of things that are going on in Mexico are related to the drug policy in the United States. And employers here who take advantage of undocumented people are competing unfairly in our market. And so what I would suggest is that we start punishing not the people who come here, but the people who give them the work and are taking advantage of those people, just like the potato farmers and other types of people who are very happy to employ individuals who don't have documents because they can take advantage of them. And so if we could actually not necessarily just close the border, but close the types of things that are drawing people here, we would not have to spend money on the border fence. We could actually keep the people from coming here and wanting to come here.
Thank you, Angie.
Can I be real quick? I just want to take note that we agree on getting rid of ethanol subsidies, the mandate, and the trade protectionism that has caused so much of our corn crop to be diverted to something that's a winner and loser thing. Congress decided 7 or 8 years ago, we pick a winner here, and we're going to do all kinds of things in law to favor that one category, ethanol. Let's get rid of that one, and then go on to the next area of agreement we might be able to find. So thank you.
Okay. Here's another area of agreement, I think, is that if we look at securing our borders, how many people fly into the United States of America each day? Almost all of the people who have come here to try to do us harm from someplace else came here legally. Then, if you want to really secure the country, you're talking about a lot more than putting up a fence across the Mexican-United States border.
Thank you, Mike. Okay, real quick, because I want to move on with the little bit of time.
Let me just say one last thing about securing the borders. Most people who are here illegally came legally on some sort of permit and stayed too long. The idea that you're going to fix this problem by building a huge fence, you're not going to do it.
Okay, thank you. We only have a few minutes left. I want to get to this. The Gazette's editorial board met with Mitt Romney on Monday night and asked him about an ad that he has running in Colorado that promises 200,000 new jobs if we elect him. And we asked, what is the key to, how are you going to create jobs? And his first answer was better energy policy. And he said, if the Keystone XL pipeline will be built if you elect Mitt Romney, and it will be built if I have to build it myself. So I'd like to hear from each side of the panel what you would favor as an energy policy, and specifically I would like you to address the Keystone XL pipeline.
And is it them first or us?
Who's the first?
I just want to say I'd like to see Mitt Romney spend the next 4 years building that Keystone pipeline.
I think that means Mike Litwin is going to vote for Mitt Romney.
Here we are.
If he does that, I will.
Yeah. Mike Litwin endorses Mitt Romney today at the Independence Institute. Now that is a headline. Energy policy. One of the things that I love about, especially the Independence Institute, and it seems like Mitt Romney has embraced it, sort of a similar type of attitude, is all that makes sense. So in other words, get rid of production tax credits for wind because it's wildly expensive. And even Michael Bennet, our own senator, has said, at some point, wind energy has to stand on its own. But we are an economy that is powered by fossil fuels, like it or not. We have to have it. We demand energy right away. We want to be able to flip a switch and the light comes on. We want to be able to go to a store and continue with commerce, purchase something. And the only way you can do that is to have, at least right now, a carbon-based economy. That's where we are. That is the reality of the situation. Now, as to the Keystone Pipeline is more than just bringing a fossil fuel to the United States. It's also about being able to build infrastructure. We've got to have, especially if we're going to transition to natural gas, we've got to have the infrastructure to be able to do that. That includes a Keystone pipeline from Canada. If you don't think that the Canadians aren't going to sell that just because we don't want it, well, I've got, unicorns grazing in my backyard. The Chinese are more than willing to take that. But they'd like nothing more than to sell it to us. And we can work with the environmentalists to make it as eco-friendly as possible. The reality is we have a carbon-based economy, and you cannot just switch that overnight. But we have to have the infrastructure, and that includes the Keystone pipeline and also being able to move natural gas and oil across the country.
So, this debate should have been at least 2 hours. I mean, we could talk about this for 2 hours. So, y'all want to stay here? We'll do a Daniel Webster. I'll do a 5-hour thing. Amy will do a 5-hour thing, and then we can take questions afterwards. But let's just really talk about the energy policy, because 2 minutes is absolutely not sufficient. But let's just say energy policy should not be a partisan issue. It is an evaluation of costs and benefits, and let us have a free debate about this. But let us not say that wind shouldn't be subsidized to some extent when we refuse to acknowledge the subsidies that we've had for the oil and the natural gas industry. The Denver Post recently had a thing that said $100 million of subsidies went into developing the techniques they're now using for fracking. Well, hello, what kind of a subsidy is that for the natural gas industry? Huge. You're right, they picked winners and losers. The corn subsidy and ethanol, picking winners and losers, absolutely. But what we really need is to stop having a partisan debate about energy policy and make a debate which makes sense. The idea that we're in carbon and therefore we have to continue with carbon is just like saying we had steam engines and we have to keep steam engines. When diesel engines came in, steam engines disappeared within a year because they were stupid, costly, and a pain in the butt to maintain. Carbon fossil fuel economy is going to do the same thing once we allow and have a really serious debate about where we need to go with our energy policy.
Point is, we're not allowing it. We're mandating it. Let me just give you subsidies real quick. Fiscal year 2010, and this is from Energy Administration. For solar power, $775.64 per megawatt hour. For wind, $56.29. For nuclear, $3.14. For hydroelectric, $82. Coal, $64. Natural gas and petroleum, 64 cents. I agree. Get rid of all subsidies. Let them all compete. But the point is, you can't rely on wind and solar because they don't have the ability to deliver the power we need to drive our economy. So if you want to reduce economic growth, then by all means go to more renewables, mandate more of them. But you cannot just turn off our carbon-based economy.
So I'll fight back with a little bit of numbers. NREL, Renewable Energies, has put in about $831 million into the economy through the renewable energy stuff. They just have that on their web. And let's just say $1 trillion in Iraq spent over fighting oil. I don't think that the subsidies for oil the subsidies for renewables can ever compete with $1 trillion with the Iraq war.
Well, that was an interesting turn. The President's own Energy Information Agency tells us that by 2035 we'll still be 78% reliant on hydrocarbons for the energy we need to run our economy. Now, that is almost a negligible change from where we're at today. We're all fans of renewable energy sources, and we all want those to move forward, but the reality is they're not quite ready for prime time yet. That's the issue. So does it make any sense to be at war with the oil and gas and coal industry when we know that 4 out of 5 BTUs that we need for our energy are going to come from hydrocarbons? We don't think so. Mitt Romney has proposed an important initiative that I think we need to say at this debate, and that's energy independence for North America by the end of the decade. Folks, that is big. That is beyond energy security. That's national security. That's a good mission for America. And Mitt Romney's the only one that's talking about it. The reality is the other administration, the current administration, has been moving us in the opposite direction.
We got to wrap things up, so Stan.
Okay, 2 quick points. First of all, Bob, every president since Jimmy Carter has talked about energy independence for America. Secondly, I agree we're not going to change the carbon economy at this point, but what we need to realize is the subsidies and the tax breaks that the oil and gas industry has had for decades has put it in a position where it's impossible for renewables and solar and wind to be on a level playing field. We have to be realistic about that. We have to provide reasonable subsidies and supports for those alternatives.
The big difference right now is that we know we've got the energy resources and we have the technology to go get them and use them and still protect our environment. That's the big difference between right now and any other administration, any other era. We can get this done.
And real quick, the subsidies, the massive subsidies into wind and solar in particular, as Bob said, this is technology not ready for prime time. It serves as a perverse incentive. What you do is you have technologies that aren't ready and you're propping them up. Abound Solar is a prime example. The quote that was in the Daily Caller yesterday was one of the worst things that happened to Abound Solar was the DOE loan guarantee, because they spent all their time trying to comply with the federal government rules, mandates, and production metrics that they had to meet instead of making a better product.
I think we're going to leave it there. I know this could be a 2-hour debate. We could sit here all day and go past the presidential debate tonight, but I think some folks got to get to work. Thank you all for coming and for
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. No, it's our pleasure to be here.